sort of like each reward tier is like step in evolution, standing upright, Lucy, Java Man, fire starter. But then you get to the next level, the very top one, and you get all the stuff that all the other levels get. You get all the versions of the new Tukey. There's art prints by guest artists, but you also get there's only 5 of these available. Mint copies of the first printing of Bone Number One, right out of the box. We took them straight out of the box back in 1991 and put them in a backing board. We have 5 of those. There's only going to be 5 of those. So I won't say any more than that. But that's I saw your face. It's we're going all out on that. Oh, because and there's a reason for that. We are celebrating this July the 30th anniversary of Bone Number One. Bone Number One hit the stands July 1991, and Tukey, if we get funded, and I'm hopeful that we will hit the stands July of this year, 30 years to the month.
Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. I am with Jeff Smith, who, to comic book fans, you need no introduction, but how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, Dwight. How are you doing?
I'm doing well as well. Bone is a landmark in comic book, in the history of comic books. But before we get started on that, I know you got a couple of big comic book influences, and I feel like as time goes by, they don't get talked about a lot anymore. Carl Barks stood out among his peers. I'm sure there were a lot of people doing funny animal comics when you were growing up. But what made him stand out on the stands as you were growing up?
Well, when I was reading comics as a kid, it was before comic book shops, and it was before they even wrote down credits, like who drew it or who wrote it. So I would go to the pharmacy on the corner, the little drugstore, and ask the guy behind the counter if I could have the comics box. And he'd pull out this cardboard box, and in it would be all the new comics, just all loose mess around. And I'd just go sit in the waiting room of the drugstore and look through it and pick them out and buy the ones I wanted. So you would come across different kind of funny animal comics. I liked everything. I liked Archie. I liked Batman. I liked Casper the Friendly Ghost. Harvey Comics. I don't know. Do you even remember those or know what they are?
Yeah,
Little
Harvey,
Lulu
Richie
and,
Rich.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay.
Hot Stuff, the Little Devil.
So there was, there was books, Donald Duck comics and stuff, but and Uncle Scrooge. But they didn't always have the good artist in it. Sometimes it was someone I thought was kind of not that good. So when I would just follow this one artist, I would recognize the style, and that's what it was. Can you hear me? Okay, the wind just kicked up a lot.
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was weird. I had to find him, and the reason it stood out to me is that he had this incredible style of just, first of all, the drawing. That the ducks were very simple and clean and appealing, but the backgrounds were very detailed and realistic looking, and that contrast was, I don't know, that just really worked for me. That really put me right there. I liked looking at it. I liked living in that world while I was reading the story. And he also had an incredible talent for moving the characters through the frames, through the different panels. He knew when to, move them just a little bit, and then he knew when to move them a lot and and control the pacing. He was a master at that. And of course, I didn't even know his name until I guess his fans kind of like exposed him in like the late 60s, but I didn't learn his name until the 70s even.
And that, what you just described, is probably from his animation background, which you kind of share. We see that kind of thing in Bone when
you do, but I don't know. Some of it must have come from animation, but a lot of it was, I wouldn't have called it theory when I was in high school, but a lot of that theory started long before I was in animation. I was watching animation, and I took a lot of inspiration from films.
Mhm.
There's certain directors I really liked. I really love Spielberg. I love John Ford. I like Kurosawa. Um, there's a lot of information I get from that, and I had already begun, even in my looking at when I was 9 or 10, reading Neil Adams and like picking up the kinds of things he was doing. He was doing groundbreaking. Uh-oh. Can you hear me all right still?
I hear the plane, but I can hear you.
All right. He was doing really groundbreaking work where he was he would show like a fight with Batman against a gang of criminals, but instead of just like real pow shots, just really dynamic shots of one guy hit with a jaw, another guy in the stomach or whatever, he actually showed the room and showed him hitting one guy in the face and another guy with a kick to the stomach, and then the next panel he's going to get two other guys, but the guys that he punched in the last panel are crumpling from the hits they got. So it was this sort of, I started thinking in these terms of more complete comics. These are the comics that give you everything you need to know, not too much, not too little, but they were just more complete. And I started that before animation, but I'm sure animation helped focus me on where to focus your energy because it's so time consuming.
Yeah. And speaking of animation, one of the things that you always mention as a big influence is the Pogo Special birthday special.
I do, yeah.
And one of the things I found out while I was researching for this was the Pogo Special birthday special was actually widely panned when it came out. And
It doesn't hold up,
it
to
doesn't
be
hold
honest.
up. But
It doesn't really hold
I
up.
feel like there's something there to be said. There's something there to be said for the fact that you can be influenced by anything.
Yes, and of course, I mean, when you're a kid, you see things with different eyes. I mean, one thing that's amazed me about Bone is I wrote it originally for adults. I wrote it for just people that were into comics and cartoons, and I just figured that people that like Bugs Bunny and Carl Barks would really dig it, or Pogo. But then it took on this life of being a scholastic book for young readers and kids as young as 5, and it's been around long enough that these kids read it throughout growing up, and they have these different experiences that they tell me about reading it. It's different to them when they read it as a college student as when they read it when they were 10. Stuff like that. Well, I had that same experience with the Pogo special birthday special, uh, because I saw it and I just loved cartoons. The cartoons were a little more special and rare back then. You only got on Saturday mornings, or if there was like a Charlie Brown special. And this Pogo special, I recognized the characters from the Sunday Funnies, and it looked really good to me. And I thought it was really good. I loved it. But you don't get to watch it over and over again, right? It was only on television once. That was it. So I
Yeah.
just had my memories of it. And I remember there was a girl named Tammy in my class. I think I was like in the 4th grade. And she saw it too. And her dad had a Pogo book. And she brought her dad's Pogo book into school to give it to me because everybody knew I was the cartoon guy, the comic book guy. I love that stuff. And she brought it to me. And that changed my life.
You still have it?
I completely. I mean, I saw two things. I saw comics that were drawn unbelievably because the comics were drawn so much better than the animated special. I mean, it looked like a Disney movie drawn, and it was thick. It was like a Calvin and Hobbes book, but it was from the 50s. But it was big, fat, and that set everything in motion for me. I became obsessed with Pogo, and I became obsessed with someday doing a book collection like that of whatever I was going to be doing.
And with Walt Kelly's Pogo, I mean, I know he's also one of the greatest of all time. There's a similarity between the way Pogo is designed, just the structure of his face to the bones. Is that intentional?
Yes, in a way it is.
Mm.
I actually created the bone characters when I was very young, before I knew about Pogo. And they kind of looked like bones in a way, like their heads were kind of shaped like cartoon Pluto the pup
Yeah.
Bone. Right? But I named him after a character in Don Martin, Mr. Phone
Bone
Bone.
Bone.
Yeah.
It's
And
not one character, it's every character.
oh, it's every character. It's like his generic Dr. Phone Bone or Mrs. Phone Bone or whatever. Uh, but I was a big fan of Mad Magazine and Don Martin when I was very young. My dad used to read it to me. Um, but the construction, but as I learned to draw and I studied Kelly, and I learned how to almost through just absorbing it and just trying to figure it out. There was such appeal to his characters that naturally that began to seep into my own work. I was trying like hell to draw it exactly like Kelly, but I didn't quite make it. But that's how you get your own style when you fail to steal what you're trying to do.
Gonna put you on the spot, Jeff.
Yeah.
If asked, which I am asking, which one of the two of them is the better artist?
Between Barks and
And
Kelly.
Kelly.
Ooh. Ooh, that's really I'm too much on the spot. I don't think I'm gonna
Okay.
I don't think I can do it. I can't call it.
Okay. You Bone came out in an era when, self-publishing was really I feel like it would have been called the golden age of self-publishing, except it's arguable that now is the golden age of self-publishing. Would you say?
Interesting.
Um,
We are definitely entering a new period here. But yeah, I'd have to give that the golden age of self-publishing. I mean, that was it was sort of like the golden age of comics. We continue to have fantastic new moments, but that first one, that's usually the gold. That's the one we have golden memories of.
Yeah.
Better than even it really was.
and
Now with Kickstarter, there's something new happening.
it's crazy, right? Like
Yes.
it's all in like how do you
Well,
think it has changed since the late 80s?
well, Kickstarter is very different from what we were doing in the late 80s and 90s. But it's the same too, because it's really people doing what they want, talking directly to their audience. And I would say, well, and of course, the Kickstarter is a brilliant application. It really does it really connects the creator and the readers in an unbelievable way,
Mhm.
and very successful. It seems to be. But what's the biggest difference to me is the talent of the people working now. The talent that's making their own comics is I don't even have a big enough adjective. It's light years beyond the pool. I mean, there were some very talented people back in my time as well, but it was a very small pool. This I can't get over it. There are so many talented people. The artwork is definitely beyond what I even pictured back then, because I mean, there's so many people that do painterly things that have skills in color and light that I could only dream of. So the biggest thing that makes this a new golden age, I think, is just purely the talent that's on view. I can't hardly believe it.
I think also one of the differences is that today, I think when you go to a Kickstarter, you see a variety, like a really wide variety of genres and styles and everything. I feel that when self-publishing was big in the late 80s, there was a predominance of that anti-superhero style, a lot of autobio, um, and definitely more for adults and whatnot.
Well,
And
there was the two things. I think that there was that autobio kind of anti-social. It wasn't antisocial. It was more like, I don't know. You know what I'm talking about.
yeah,
It was a little bit dreary, but it was a very slice of life. Some of it was good. The people that could do it were good. The other one was sort of like, yeah, superhero parody type things.
and superhero parody.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or I don't know. It was weird when Bone showed up. I didn't realize I was doing something.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, it
you
was a little off. Well, I only learned it later I just assumed, as I mentioned earlier, that there'd be people that liked Bugs Bunny and Pogo and Karl Barks, and that would dig it. And I was just hoping to sell enough to pay for my print run. But it, I was told later by like Colleen Dorn and some of my self-publishing friends that they they were like, wow, that you draw really well, but you're not going to make any money because this nobody likes cartoony stuff and talking animals. And we were all amazed when it just kind of clicked. I was just talking to Billy Tucci, who was doing She self-published back then, and he was asking me about that. He says, "Do you remember that when Bone took off?" He says it felt like a light switch just went off. You know, we were all just hanging out, and then one day you were just like, it just boom, and it was like that a little bit. It was weird, but I'm glad it happened.
And I think I read somewhere that the reason that you got so strong in self-publishing was because no one else was doing what you were doing.
Yeah, today another young self-publisher who's doing quite well now is Raina Telgemeier
Oh yeah.
with her Smile books. I mean, she's the queen of YA graphic novels. Uh, she helped give me some perspective on what Bone meant to her and to her generation, and that was not that she wanted to do fantasy or draw like me, because she doesn't do either.
Mm-hmm.
But it was that Bone just showed her that you didn't have to do superheroes or autobios. Because Bone just said you could do any dumbass thing you want, and I'm very proud of that.
One of the things I mentioned in our last interview that I really liked about Bone that I thought had a really Karl Barks influence was that you start off with a humorous story
Mm.
and then it veers off into this fantasy story that is completely in line with what's going on, but is also, wait, what just happened?
I
And
know, I know. That was not a stroke of genius on my part. I was actually scared. I was actually hiding the fact that I had this big fantasy story I wanted to tell. Because in 1991, Tolkien had a big resurgence in the 70s when I was a kid. Uh, I wasn't a kid; I was in high school, and I loved Tolkien. And I really and heavy metal came out in like 77. So I was reading Mobius, and Star Wars came out. So I was really into these sci-fi fantasy, not for little kids kind of thing. I really loved Tolkien. But by 1990, it was kind of looked down on. It had devolved into imitators who were just doing sword and sorcery, and it was, a lot of elves and dwarves, and we shall go on a merry quest. And I was trying to hide the fact that this was a giant interconnected story that was high fantasy for as long as I could. And I just like tried to. Each issue was very important to me. The groundwork was laid. It was a piece of the story. It was a chapter that was going to go forward. But eventually, I got to the point where I can't hide this anymore. It's just gonna come out. Grandma Ben is the queen of the valley, and I tried to have fun with that as the story went on. With the Bones were basically Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, or the Marx Brothers or something. So they were kind of smart asses about the whole thing. Like Phony Bones, like, please don't tell me Grandma Ben's the queen of the valley. Please don't tell me she's the queen of the valley. Oh, she's the queen of the valley. So I tried to keep it. I try to have fun with it like that.
they're Mickey, Donald, and Goofy.
They're Mickey, Donald, and Goofy. They're Jerry, Kramer,
And
uh,
George.
and George. There's a thing in comedy, the Marx Brothers, the Stooges, where you've got the three types. They're the
Yeah.
same three in every grouping. Little slight differences.
The straight man, the sleazy guy, and the goofball.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. You got it.
And the girl.
And the girl. We have Thorne. We have
With Elaine.
Elaine.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember when my nephew was reading the one volume edition, and he gets to the part where Grandma Ben tells Thorne who she is, and she's like, "You, Thorne Harvestar, are the
Yeah.
queen." And then And then he puts the book down and he looks at me and he goes, "Where is this book going?" That was awesome because I had the exact same reaction.
Hold on to your hat, kid.
And I think another thing that's interesting about it was that I actually read Bone before I read Barks. I read
Before.
before I read Barks, before I read Karl Barks.
Oh, right.
And when I finally read Barks, I read it through that lens, that it was one of the influences for Bone. And I think it was the Atlantis story where,
Oh, that's one of the best ones.
So that's maybe like 6 pages of him chasing that coin down. And then eventually he gets down to Atlantis. And that's when it clicked for me. I was like, I think I see it. I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that was one of Barks's superpowers. He was a genius at coming up with ridiculous reasons for Uncle Scrooge to take Donald and the nephews on some crazy adventure, almost always to chase after his dime, which in that particular case accidentally got dropped out of an airplane. And so they had to go down to the bottom of the ocean. And then, and you're following, you're on this adventure because they have to buy special diving gear and all this, and Donald is worried about it, and the nephews are excited, and you're completing it, and then all of a sudden they come across Atlantis, and there's that splash page where you're up here. This is almost like a Hergé Tintin shot. You're up here looking kind of just over the shoulders of the ducks, looking down, and there's Atlantis, which is lit down there like a city at the bottom of the ocean. Whoo, I'm getting chills just kind of thinking about it, remembering it right now.
I love seeing you fan out. Another thing that I thought was interesting, because I was watching your documentary, The Cartoonist, in preparation for this, was you said that you might actually be more famous in Europe.
I don't know about that, but did I say something like that?
I think you said it's possible that you are.
Well, I do know that Don Rosa, who took over kind of Barks' throne as the good duck artist. I would go over to Europe all the time. There were a couple times a year, and the only Americans I would see consistently every time were Don Rosa and Neil Gaiman. And so the three of us would always, at least some point try to get some lunch or go grab a drink together. But Don Rosa, he's well known here, and he goes to shows and there are people lined up to get his autograph. But in Europe, he's royalty. I mean, they treat him like he deserves to be treated. They think of him the way I think of Karl Barks. So he is way more famous in Europe. I feel very well treated in Europe. I don't know that I'm more famous. I don't remember the context of what I would have been talking about. Who knows what kind of crap I was talking about.
Well, that was 2009, and now, like, you were mentioning also in that documentary that you when actually everybody mentioned it in a convention, everybody just has a huge line for you. That's how does that feel, knowing?
That is amazing. And every year I think this is the last year, but it still happens. People still get in these huge lines. I'm just super grateful. I'm just super grateful for that.
How do you feel, Bone?
And the interesting thing is the lines. I'm always worried that the lines are going to go away or stop or change or something like nobody wants. I mean, I've done book signings where nobody shows up. I mean, that happens, but usually that's just, maybe there's a mix-up or who knows, or maybe nobody felt like coming out that night or something. But I've definitely experienced really long lines. And when I joined Scholastic and we started putting out the Bone books, I was worried that the grown-up readers who had been coming to see me for years would stop coming, and I just assumed they would just have little kids coming with their parents. No, it's both. I have little kids in line. Right behind them is a big, long-haired nerd, a comic book guy, and everybody's wonderful. I have the greatest readers in the world.
How do you feel Bone has aged in the last 30 years, given that we have moved away from that type of dichotomy between autobio and superhero parody and everything?
Well, there's certainly a lot of the humor in Bone I feel like I see it a lot more in a lot more places, like even in films and things. But I think it holds up. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I haven't read it in a while, but
I have. It holds
I
up.
mean, people are still buying it, so I guess it's all right. Well, I'm glad.
Yeah.
It's a good. I like it that there's more diversity in comics in terms of genre and in terms of creators, and we have a lot more women making comics. We have a lot more people that aren't white. I mean, it was only white guys when I mean, it wasn't only white guys, but it was
Mostly
99% was white creators and white
men.
collector men,
Yeah.
white men, and it was definitely a white boys club. But that, I mean, that was changing in the '80s and '90s, and I think that's for the good.
And I think also last year during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, you released a little bit of fan art with a black bone hand.
Yeah,
Thought that was
yeah.
interesting. Of course, we've never seen Boneville and likely never will we?
No, we never will, but we now know there are black bones there
So
now.
there's diversity among the bones as well.
There's diversity. Yes.
And also, another thing with Bone is that you do have, and speaking of diversity, mentioned this in our last interview, you have very, very, very strong women in Bone with Thorn and Grandma
Yeah.
Ben. I think it could be argued that Thorn is the actual main character in Bone, considering she has the hero arc.
Yeah. Hold on. The Navy is scrambling. We have a. I'm in Key West, and we're like 90 miles from Cuba, so there's always been a huge naval base here.
That's
That's an
interesting.
F-18 just screaming overhead right there. So yes, Thorn. Well, I wouldn't say Thorn's the main character. I would say Foamboat and Thorn are the two main characters. He's a, and you already described him. He's he's the everyman. He's embarrasses easily, especially when it comes to matters of the heart. Uh, but he's very quick-witted and he's surprisingly brave and loyal. And Thorn, who grew up on the farm, uh, gave her a thick skin, and she's very comfortable with who she is. So her journey is the more hero's journey-ish type of thing. The Luke Skywalker, she has to discover her responsibilities and kind of grow up with them. So,
Eh,
but I've never had any problem with this. Is really Thorne and Grandma's. This is their story, and the Bones just kind of stumble into it.
Yeah.
But like the Marx Brothers in films like Night at the Opera or Day at the Races, that's what happens. The Marx Brothers stumble into this story that's going on, some trauma between two star-crossed lovers, and of course they fall in love with a beautiful young ingenue, uh, and they help her succeed. And but nobody, for 1 second, doesn't think it's the Marx Brothers aren't the stars of the movie. You know what I mean?
Of
So
course.
I've never worried too much about that.
And with Thorn as well, just now, I have to ask this question. What's the status of the Netflix show? I mean,
It's going. We did get off to a slow start because of the pandemic.
mhm.
I was literally planning to fly out there April 1st last year to start, and we hadn't hired anybody. Just me and the producers at Netflix were, talking and, you know, getting excited about it. And then at the end of March, everything shut down. I mean,
Yeah.
that was so we got to. There was a good thing about that, though. There was a bunch of people who had worked on some shows that I really wanted, but they were all tied up until like the last fall. Well, since we didn't get started until September, a lot of they were all out of contract, and we asked them to come, and they all came. So I got all the people I really, really wanted to work on Bone to are now working on it.
Can you name
Uh,
them?
I don't want to. No, I'm not going to name them
Okay.
yet because I don't want to steal Netflix's thunder. Um, but you would know some of them. You definitely know the shows. So yep. So we have a meeting this Friday where we're going to catch up. I've seen storyboards. I've seen animatics. Um, I am excited. I am cautiously optimistic for the first time.
Very cool. And how do you think people are going to receive it
I,
in
you know,
animated form?
I don't know yet because we're just actually like forming it. You know what I mean? We're still building the teams. I don't know if it's going to be 2 seasons. I don't know if it's 3 seasons. You know, so I don't know that I'm not at that point where I can go, oh man, people are going to shit when they see this. But I I'll tell you the animatics I've seen are very promising.
How closely are you going to stick to the source material? Because I know the Telltale games was pretty much a direct adaptation of the first two books.
It's going to be close. It's not going to be the same. It is a different it is a different beast. This is not my telling of Bone. This is sort of this group's telling of our this new group's telling of Bone, and it's very close. I mean, it's very close. I mean, I wrote the first episode, and it follows the unless we change it. I mean, right now that's I've written the first episode, but it's we're sticking pretty close to the story. Yeah, you have to make decisions like are we gonna put Tom Bombadil in there? Or are we gonna not? You gotta make some calls sometimes. That was
And
a reference to the Peter Jackson movie.
yeah. um
You're just testing your nerdometer there.
the Peter Jackson movie. I'm not aware of Tom. I'm sorry.
Oh, Tom, hey, you've seen the movie, though, right?
Yeah. I've seen the movie.
Tom Bombadil was a character from the original Lord of the Rings books that
Okay.
didn't make the movie. I mean, he was. I, I didn't miss him, quite
Oh,
frankly, but a lot of people were quite upset that there was no Tom Bombadil in the movie.
I understand. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of that going on in adaptations and everything. So,
Yeah, if it's done well, it doesn't matter. It's just if it's done for the right reasons, you know.
and can you give a few words about your time working on Shazam and Rassel? As you can see from my background there, I'm a big Shazam fan. It's
I
actually
had
the
yeah.
first one that I gave to my nephew and my niece because it's a little bit thinner.
I had a lot of fun with it. Um, I enjoyed that character. I wasn't a momentous fan of Captain Marvel, but I did. I liked Captain Marvel, and I started buying his books when the DC started publishing them again in the '70s. There was a TV show, and anything you could get about comic books or superheroes was a treat. So that show really doesn't hold
No.
up. But it was the best back then. We would take everything. Um, it worked for me because after I finished Bone, I wasn't quite ready to start my next. I already knew I wanted to do Wrestle, but I hadn't
Mhm.
quite flushed it out, and I was still having trouble breaking away from Bone. Bone was a pretty big has a pretty big shadow, and mentally, it must be like sometimes I've seen actors talk about they get off of one project and they go to the next one and they're still doing the same character from the previous movie. It takes 1 minute to shift.
Yeah.
It was sort of like that, I think. And so when I got this offer from DC to do Captain Marvel, I was like, this is good because that's a character that I think fits in my wheelhouse pretty good. It's got his characters are based on mythology and mythological characters. He has a talking tiger. A lot of people, I don't know if I told you this in the last interview, but a lot of people, when they found out I was going to do Shazam, were like, well, you're not going to do the talking tiger, are you? And I was like, man, that's the main reason I'm taking this gig. I love the talking tiger.
You've done a
Uh,
talking tiger.
yes, and I had a talking tiger, and both my talking tigers are all based on Shere Khan from the animated Jungle
Yeah.
Book. But
As are probably
I had a
most
great,
talking tigers.
yeah,
Yeah.
is what?
As are probably most talking tigers.
Yes, I had a blast. I loved the character. I loved the world. DC was very open to me doing whatever. I guess. I mean, not much had been done with Captain Marvel. Jerry Ordway had
Mhm.
done some great runs on Captain Marvel. Um, but they were like, just take a new stab at it. In fact, they told me it was going to be canon. They said, you're going to start it and this is going to be the real thing. But by the time I finished it, it took me like 2 years because I wanted to do the 4 books and be done with it
Yeah.
before we published it. But during that 2 years, there was a huge regime change at DC Comics. When I started, Paul Levitz was the publisher, and Mike Carlin was the editor in chief. And it was Mike Carlin and Paul that I was working with, and they were gone by the time I finished it. And they weren't particularly interested in my cartoony bone all ages Captain Marvel. And they started this whole, I forget what it's called, 52 or something, where
Yeah.
they changed it, and Captain Marvel was a big part of that. Well, when I finished the book and I showed up, uh, Dan DiCarlo, that's the art.
Dan Didio.
Dan DiDio, thank you. Dan DiDio, I met with him, and I could tell, he was, again, I had gotten the vibe that I hope they still want to do this book, right? Because it's done now. I brought it in and I showed him printouts of the 4 books, and it went well. He picked them up and one by one started flipping through them. He really liked the covers, especially. He's like, all right, we got to get this on the schedule. So I have to say but the caveat of that story is I was no longer canon. This was not real. Now this was sort of like a guest star take on it.
Mm,
It was a great, but other than that,
okay.
It was a good experience. Book's still in print. People still write me about it. So
Yeah, we
good.
love it. You did this little sketch of Captain Marvel, Mary Marvel, who is, according to my niece, the best version of Mary Marvel to ever exist.
Thank you.
And the Bones, and then Ted, and then a game that we like to play is how many characters are actually in this sketch, because it's Ted is not obvious to everyone. Yeah.
That's right.
And I guess it was really different working on something that was owned by another company rather than after all those years.
It was different. I didn't struggle with it very much because it was a release valve for me, in between Bone and Rassel, and I knew it was somebody else's character, so all I had to do was play with it for a little while. And I was pretty clear that I will write out the scripts, which my scripts are like little scribbled comics, so they can see what everybody's going to look like, what was happening for all 4 of the miniseries, and they would approve it and then leave me alone, and I would just do it. So cool. It was very much like working on my own thing, because they were like, do whatever you want. I showed them the scripts and they approved it, and I was off and running. It was great.
And Rassel, that was like 180 from Bone.
Yeah, I guess so. It surprised people, but again, I never really thought of Bone as a children's book. I just thought it was supposed to look like a Carl Barks kind of story, you know what I mean? But it was never meant to be. The same with Rassel. To me, it was just like, while I was inking Bone late at night, I would have my laptop open and I'd be watching The Maltese Falcon or The Big Sleep. And I was really into 2 things about noir. Just the intensity of the situation. It was always kind of claustrophobic, but also the technique of noir is that you are in the protagonist's pocket. You don't know anything that he doesn't know. Mm-hmm. So that adds to that claustrophobic feeling. And I was like, I would really like to tell a story like that. And at the same time, my favorite character to write was Phony. So I was kind of looking forward to writing like a noirish character like Sam Spade, who is morally ambiguous, but he has a code. And I thought, that's what I want to try and do. And it didn't even occur to me that it was 180 from Bone. It just was.
It was the hard science that made me think it was a 180.
Yeah, I always like to mash up my passions. With Bone, it was comic strips, epic fantasy, adventure boy stories, And then with Rassel, it was physics. I was really into physics and parallel universes and noir. And with Tukey, which I started as it was short lived as a web comic, but I'm finished. I finished it now. I've got two
Yeah.
complete graphic novels in the can, and I'm going to launch a Kickstarter on May 4th. May the 4th be with you.
May the fourth be with you.
Um, May the 4th be with you. Uh, and the same thing with Tukey, which I'm back to now. I'm mixing. I was a huge fan as like a middle school kid of pulp heroes, Conan, Doc Savage, that kind of stuff. And so I love that. I love hidden worlds like Burroughs' Lost World,
Yeah.
Jurassic Park. I love that stuff. And I love human evolution. Fascinated by it. I have as many books in my library on evolution as I do on physics or comics, to be honest. So I find these stories interesting, and I follow that more than I worry about, oh, kids are going to like this, or I don't know. I don't worry about that. In fact, I had planned Rassel as early as 2000,
Oh,
long,
okay.
long before Scholastic, you know, made Bone a children's book for sure. So I wasn't even, when I was planning Rassel, I wasn't even thinking I wasn't a kid's book,
Hmm.
actually. I was about to be one and I didn't know
And so one of the things that I love about Bone, I'm so glad to hear that Phony is your favorite character to write, because I love the fact that that man learns nothing
it.
in in the entirety of the book.
Are you
He's the
talking about
exact
funny?
same, yeah. He's the exact same character from beginning to end. And I love it.
He
I feel
is,
like
he
it would
is.
have been, I feel like any other writer would have decided that he was going to have this arc where he was going to learn to be kind and everything. And I think that the way you did it made it more special.
That's right. I think I wrote to you back when you asked me about that. I said, "Yeah, Pony's a stinker." Yeah, he's a stinker, and he's never going to not be a stinker. I used to tell people, and it's less funny nowadays, but people would ask me during the making of the book, especially kids, like, "Is how come Phony doesn't pay any penalty for these rotten things he does?" And I says, because that's real life. He doesn't, I said, and I used to say this, he says he pays the same penalties that these people that are in Congress or in politics. They don't pay any penalty in real life for that. And like I said, it's a lot less funny now than it
Yeah.
was in the 90s.
Arguably, the entire book is his penalty because it starts out with him getting
Yeah,
penalized.
right. Well, he doesn't actually win, but he doesn't realize it.
Can you,
Again, a lot like Trump. A lot like Trump.
so much
He,
like
he
Trump,
he's the biggest loser ever, and he has no idea. He has no idea.
and he'll take credit for everything too.
Yeah, yeah. Just like Phony Bone.
With Tukey, I remember following the webcomic when you were putting it out at the time, and then it just stopped. Can I ask what happened there?
The short answer is uh, it wasn't living up to the story wasn't living up to what I was thinking it would be, and that's partly because as I got to as I can't remember how many pages I did, like about 60 or so, and I started to once the kids came into the story, I realized what the potential for the story really could be, and at the same time, I was doing more research on that period of evolution and our history 2 million years ago. And I'd been going on just on the premise that that was the period when Homo erectus arose and also began the diaspora, not just from not just out of Africa, but from Eastern Africa and all over the continent, and then out of the continent and all over the world. Uh, and I thought that was a fascinating moment because there were other species of humans still hanging around that hadn't given it up yet.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, "Now, there's a moment, man. I can't believe there's stories like that." Well, there are. I mean, Quest for Fire is sort of like that, but
Yeah.
it's not the same. It wasn't quite as exactly correct. So um, the other thing I found out was that the reason Homo erectus arose at that time was because of the discovery of fire.
Hmm.
That is a that is a big moment and thing to put into a story. And I was like, I've got to figure that out and do that. So at that point, I also just didn't like the comics because I had to open them like a calendar or
Yeah.
something, because I had built them in this shape for the for
For
the
the
for the
for the monitor.
web comics. Um, so now I still have that shape, but now I can just do them in like a big book, like 300 or something, and 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 they read better. And so it's a better story. And also, I was doing CXC. I was putting that festival. So I had a lot of things going on over the last 5 years, and now the pandemic. Another reason to be grateful for it is I was stuck with nothing to do, and I've made 2 new graphic novels of Tukey, and they're looking. I feel really good about it.
It's crazy through the pandemic, everything that happened. But then I talk to artists, and they're like, and you guys are like, "Oh, I got so much stuff done."
Like Taylor Swift did like 2 albums, and I've only listened to one of them, but it was really good. I
So
was
I hear.
quite
She
amazed.
re-recorded her entire first set of albums.
That woman, she's got a lot of energy.
She, uh,
Um,
and with Tuki, if you had to sum it up in 2 sentences, what would you say the elevator pitch for it is?
oh my. Well, I mean, it's 2 million years ago. The world was filled with a lot of restless and upset spirits, and at that point, human evolution decided to make its move, and it chose fire. So then we will meet the story of this mysterious wanderer who meets up with these 3 lost children, and as they search for the mother herd of all buffalo, they venture far north into the territory of a rival species called the Habileen, who hunt and kill people who are found using fire. That's that's the shortest I can do it.
The Kickstarter's
Intrigued? Did it sound okay?
that sounds great.
Okay.
The Kickstarter is launching on May the 4th. What are the stretch goals? Have you figured that out?
The stretch goals are, there's some good ones. Are you ready? Well, most of them are just, we can get better paper. We can get alternative covers that I'm going to do that'll match to. It's 2 books. There's the 2 covers that are going to be the regular covers, but then there's one that's like a scene. We can have gatefold. They're going to be paperback. But my favorite one, and you'll have to see it, is and this is sort of like each reward tier is like step in evolution. Standing upright, Lucy, Java Man, fire starter. But then you get to the next level, the very top one, and you get all the stuff that all the other levels get. You get all the versions of the new Tukey. There's art prints by guest artists, but you also get there's only 5 of these available. Mint copies of the first printing of Bone Number 1, right out of the box. We took them straight out of the box back in 1991 and put them in a backing board. We have 5 of those. There's only going to be 5 of those. So I won't say any more than that. But I saw your face. We're going all out on that. Oh, because, and there's a reason for that. We are celebrating this July the 30th anniversary of Bone Number 1. Bone Number 1 hit the stands July 1991, and Tukey, if we get funded, and I'm hopeful that we will hit the stands July of this year. 30 years to the month.
Well, I can say you're a draw because I actually just backed the Kickstarter based on the fact that you drew a variant cover for it. Impossible Jones.
Hey, Impossible Jones.
Yeah, I mean,
that's actually I like that book.
Yeah, I like that book a lot. I mean, I backed the first one. I was going to back it anyway, but I backed your specific cover.
My cover? Cool.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Really cool.
Like, do you like my Jack Kirby hand?
Jack Kirby, Jack Cole put together?
Yes, Jack Kirby, Jack Cole. Nice. You just tested my nerdometer, didn't you?
I got a couple of things that I just want you to react to really quickly because I'm mindful of time. In the cartoonist documentary, Scott McCloud said, and I was wondering what your reaction was to this. He said that Jeff's work is a classic in a sense that once you've seen it, it's hard to ever imagine that there was ever a time that it wasn't there.
That was a pretty nice thing he said. I really respect Scott a lot. So yeah, that meant a lot to me when he said that. I don't know what it means, but I think he was very sincere about it.
I feel like it means that, like, you know how like everybody who works in superhero comics is influenced by Jack Kirby, so it's kind of hard to see how Jack Kirby changed the game to begin with. And then I feel like it's the same with you. I feel like Bone informs so much uh,
Wow.
of
Yeah.
comics.
Yeah. That. Yeah. Yes. There's an element of timelessness he's suggesting. Yeah, which is absolutely fantastic. Yep. So that's my reaction to that. I was pretty pleased because I didn't make the movie, so I didn't even know that was in there. I wasn't there when they interviewed Scott.
Yeah. I
It
mean,
was fun.
another thing that happened in the movie was you were saying that you were still influenced by the big year of 1986, Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, and Mouse. And I feel like a lot of the people, I feel like the criticism of that era has always been that people took the wrong lessons from it. And you clearly took the storytelling lessons and then you went your own way. And I thought that was really admirable.
Yes, the dark and gritty thing. I don't even think Frank Miller thought that was the point. I think he thought people missed the point. And the point was this was a real story. These had
Yeah.
characters that really go through something. They make decisions. They have to unmake decisions. Their lives are upended, and it reaches a crescendo and a really satisfying conclusion. And I had never seen a comic book do that. I'd
Hmm.
read books that had done that. I'd see movies that had done that, and I'd see small comic book things almost do that. I'm trying to think of an example. I remember there was a run of the Scree Crawl War in the Avengers that Neil
Hmm.
Adams drew. And I remember there's about 5 or 6 issues to that, and I remember thinking, this is fantastic. This is what I want. This is what I want. I it, but that's another thing that going back does not hold up.
Yeah, no, I'm
Neil's
sorry.
art Neil's artwork holds up, but holy shit, the writing is woo, it's bad. Sorry, everybody who worked on that. But I had never seen anything like it. I saw it when I read Mouse first, and I knew I was reading something special. I knew this was history. I knew this was real deal. And then really quickly after that came Dark Knight. And it
Yeah.
was before it was bound. I caught it on the second issue, and so read it as the 4 books came out. And I was like, this is phenomenal. Is everything legendary like the death of Robin Hood. It
Yeah.
was like that. It was that capstone to this legend. So it was that. But again, I thought the fact that it had a beginning and a middle and an end, just like Mouse, and pulled it off was fantastic. And then you had Watchmen, which had a little less influence on me than the other two, just because I was that big of. I didn't know the superhero references. I didn't quite get the
Mm.
tropes he was playing with, but I could see that he did that. He pulled off a real book, and that was it. I was like, that's what I'm going to do. That's it.
You went
I
your own way with it. So,
Yeah. Well, I'd been trying to sell Bone as a newspaper comic strip for years, and it just had failed. So I didn't know what to do. I didn't think it could be. I didn't if every comic strip syndicate turned it down. I didn't think Marvel was going to take it or Fantagraphics. So I didn't know what was going to happen, and I had my own animation studio. That's how I was making my money. I was a slight fantasy that I was ever going to be able to make my own little animated version of Bone. But then 1986, I saw those books. I was like, that's it. independent comics. And I saw the self-publishers at that time too, with Eastman and Laird and Dave
Yeah.
Sim. And I'm like, okay, I'm selling my animation studio, honey. I'm gonna give it all up so I can do an underground comic book.
She's like, come up with a business plan.
She did, and she made me do it, and she was right.
I've got one last question. I just want to share
All
my
right,
screen really quickly.
all right.
And I just want to ask if this was on your mind when you were designing Phony Bone.
All right.
Trying
to get this hair
because this is from a Carl Barks story called Truant Officer Donald.
I've seen that picture before. Yep.
Looks really familiar there.
Yeah, Carl Barks is he's coming back from the past, telling us what he must have visited the future or something. I don't know. Well, I've taken enough from Carl Barks. I'm pretty sure somewhere in Boneville there's a giant money bin right in the middle of town.
Thank you so much, Jeff. This was such a fun interview.
Well, it was a lot of fun, and I had fun with the written one too. So we'll talk again, man.
Thank you so much.